Hi everyone, my name is Prerik Sethi. I'm one of the co-founders of the India Insurtech Association and the founder of RIA Insurance. The India Insurtech Association is very excited to organize this event today on genetics and insurance and welcome Anu Acharya as our speaker. First, let me spend a couple of minutes to help introduce the India Insurtech Association to our participants and audience here. First, the India Insurtech Association started as a conversation between Shwetank Verma, Subhajit Mandal, and me in August 2020. While Insurtech was a hot topic of conversation amongst the insurance ecosystem in India, we found that there was no formal body driving interactions between startups, companies, and professionals within the space. And then when we looked outside of India, we found that practically every other country or region had an Insurtech association. And so we co-founded IIA, or India Insurtech Association, as a not-for-profit that brings together the entire insurance ecosystem of startups, insurers, reinsurers, policymakers, service providers, and insurance professionals onto a single platform. As we started our organization, we outlined a few high-level mission and a set of objectives for ourselves. Some of these are, number one, facilitate partnerships between startups and the broader insurance industry, such as insurers, reinsurers, service providers, and investors. Number two, help Indian insurtech companies to access global markets. Number three, connect insurtech startups with insurance industry experts, not just from within India, but also outside of India. Number four, be the independent voice of the Indian insurtech ecosystem and build forward-looking policies. Number five, publish and promote thought leadership. And number six, promote initiatives which use technology to increase the insurance penetration across different socioeconomic segments in India in a more equitable way. The growth for us has been great. In just a little over 2 years, we've now grown to over 210 plus members. So very exciting. Great time to be in Insurtech in India. We add 1 to 2 new members every single week. Amongst our various different initiatives, we conducted our first in-person event in April 2022, which was attended by 230 insurance professionals. Now, we will be organizing a second annual event this year in September in Mumbai, and we expect over 600 insurtech professionals to join us. We've already published 2 annual reports on India Insurtech landscape and trends in collaboration with BCG. The third one is just getting developed right now, and we should be releasing it in the next few weeks. What we've also done, by the way, as an organization to help promote Indian Insurtech startups that are looking to go global, we formed 10 plus partnerships with similar global Insurtech associations such as Insurtech London, Insurtech Australia, Italian Insurtech Association, Singapore FinTech Association, etc. Similarly, what we've also done is within India, we form partnerships with organizations that have a strong focus on insurance, such as Institute of Actuaries of India, National Insurance Academy, GIFT City, and BIMTech. We've done 30 plus virtual events. They come in many different, they're for life insurers, health insurers, property and casualty insurers across a number of different topics. We do these virtually by ourselves or in collaboration with partners. What we've also done is, by the way, brought together our members through a pitch book, which is available on our website. We brought together investors and startups. And then we've also gone on and partnered with large global Insurtech conferences such as ITC and Insurtech Connects. So super excited about the event today. The topic today on genetics and insurance is of great interest to the insurance community and especially to health insurers and life insurers. With the rapid change in technology, we are seeing that the insurance sector is overall getting impacted. But however, I think it's very crucial for our sector to also very carefully track the changes that are happening in the medical sciences community and the clinical technology community. And even though we are a very, very regulated industry and we are bound by local regulations around how we can use genetics for our pricing, underwriting, health management, I don't think there's any of us that really question the impact that genetics is going to have on the everyday individuals, folks like you and me. And then how can it also impact how insurers can play a role in bringing genetic science to our policyholders. I especially believe in the promise of genetics for helping our customers manage their health and health outcomes going forward. So I welcome Anu, who's the speaker today. Let me start with Anu's introduction. Anu Acharya is a serial entrepreneur, columnist, and poet. She's the founder and CEO of MapMyGenome, where she introduced personal genomics in India with Genome Patri in 2013. She's also co-founded and pioneered her first venture, Optimum Biosolutions, where through innovative bioinformatics and LIMS solutions, global acquisitions, awards, and fundraisers, she's recently received several awards and honors, including the WTI Award, Woman Entrepreneur of the Year Award, and the IIT Kharagpur Distinguished Alumnus Award. She serves on governing boards and advisory boards of various organizations and is a member of several committees, including the NASSCOM Executive Council member and the CI National Committee on Biotechnology. Anu, we welcome you here today and welcome you to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Prerak, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Shobha. Also, thanks to Anu who had reached out to me for conducting this little interaction with the Insurtech community, which is going to be of great importance for both the insurance community but also the genetics community, because there is obviously a good strong correlation between both of them. And today I think what I want to do is to be able to introduce some of the concepts and where we see their synergies, but also in terms of where the challenges are. And also I think would be great if any of you have questions to please drop them on the chat so that we can actually answer that towards the end of the presentation. So I hope you can all see my presentation. And so I think today I'm going to start from the very basics of genomics, not spending too much time, but essentially that all of us have a genetic makeup which you can today digitally break it down into A, C, T's, and G's, which are sort of like our if you think about it in a different world, you can think about it as something that if the new AI is being built with zeros and ones, we are built out of A, C, T's, and G's. So we have two strands of nucleotides bound, and so you have the double helix that is there, and then it is held together by hydrogen bonds. So there are two things, right? One is what are the differences that are there intrinsically that you have been passed on from your parents? So what did your parents actually send to you as genetic information? That would be what you can see as A, C, T's, and G's. But ultimately, the genetic variations can only be triggered by sometimes certain things. So in many cases, I think that is triggered by lifestyle and other things. So sometimes your gene might not express, even though you might have that specific mutation. So that is what we would call as a gene expression, where the genetic information is actually converted into proteins and other molecules. So essentially, if you think about it in a very simple terms, your genetics is what loads the gun and your lifestyle is what pulls the trigger. So that's what we are looking at, that we look at understanding the structure, function, and the evolution of the genome. So if you understand that basic concept, so you'll be able to understand how it is typically used, right? Now, genomics has been used in a wide variety of different things. There are. I'm only talking about things that are done for human genetics. There are also other areas where genomics is being used. But if in the case of human genetics, if you look at it, there is prevention and there is diagnostic and there is of course treatment. And when we look at it from a prevention point of view, I think the most important part is to understand, if we can predictively understand which disease you're likely to be at risk for, whether it is adult onset or whether it's something that you get right away. There are obviously genetic conditions that are what we call as monogenic conditions, but there are a large variety of conditions like your diabetes, your cardiovascular, are more multiple genes that contribute to that. You also might want to understand ancestry information to understand where you come from, because that ultimately also affects your health. The third kind of thing that we look at is nutrigenomics testing, and that basically you can understand the effect of how the genetic variations interact between your diet and health or other nutrient requirements. So, for instance, I think a lot what you eat and also how you metabolize that particular nutrient is very important. And the other part, which I think very recently, I think was introduced in the insurance industry, is to be able to look at mental health. When genetics also helps you to understand both mental and cognitive acuities as well. So these are some of the things that you would do from a preventive point of view. From the diagnostic point of view, I think the most important is where you're looking at pharmacogenetics or pharmacogenomics to be able to guide an individual drug dosage selection and response. So basically, you're trying to understand if a particular medication works for an individual or not. I think just to give a sense of why this is important, about 75% of most of the cancer drugs actually do not work for all individuals, right? And similarly, I think even common drugs like clopidogrel or metformin also don't work for an average population. So it's important to understand what will work and what won't work, especially if something like that is being reimbursed. The other very important area that we see where genetic testing is being used is prenatal testing. So you want to understand if there are certain changes in your fetus's genes or chromosomes before birth, so that you can you can either decide whether you want to have the baby or not, and also if you do, then you get genetic counseling to understand how to manage that better. Once the baby is born, there is also newborn screening to understand if there are specific genetic disorders that you can actually treat early, because many of them can be treated very early and be able to live a normal life. The fourth point in diagnostic is to confirm a particular diagnosis, to understand if that specific genetic condition is there in a symptomatic individual, to be able to understand if someone has multiple things that look like the same disease, but you want to understand what mutation you have and whether you're passing it on to your next generation or not. The fifth one is more like carrier screening. You want to understand someone is planning to have a baby. You want to understand what kind of mutations they have, because it is okay in most cases to have to be a carrier of a particular condition. But if you also then have a baby with somebody else who also has a recessive carrier gene, then you're likely 25% chance that you're going to pass it on to your next generation. The other areas that we are seeing a lot of use of genetics and genomics is in pre-implantation genetic testing. So especially in the cases where you're looking at IVF centers and others, you want to find and make sure that there is the child that is being conceived has a particular genetic and chromosomal, has no genetic or chromosomal disorder. And of course, I think most importantly, I think we're seeing a great amount of usage of genomics in cancer treatment, in looking at not just very early parts of cancer detection from liquid biopsy, but we are starting to see the heritable part of it, and then majority of it where it is being used when you're looking at a particular tumor tissue and being able to understand how that genetics is going to help them. Now, when we look at genetics in insurance, we're basically seeing that a lot of times genetics can be used to improve customer experience, because ultimately, I think the goals are similar. When you look at life insurance, you're looking at how do you make sure that you reduce the cost of that payout till the end. When you're looking at health insurance, also you want the amount of the quality of life to be good, because that ultimately means that lower reimbursements. So I think if you can improve customer experience, you can improve their lifestyle and reduce the cost of treatment and adverse effects, I think that becomes a win-win for both. It also plays an important role because it provides valuable insights to individuals to motivate them to stay healthy. And I think I can provide some resources which say that customers who get access to this kind of information are the ones who are more likely to be able to actually make the necessary lifestyle changes and therefore lead a more healthier life. And also what kind of treatment is likely to work. So I think when you think about, a lot of times people say that, a lot of medicines are very cheap in India, but I think sometimes medicines can also be fatal. So one is about effectiveness and the other is about also making sure that whether that is going to be toxic for that individual or not. So we'll start with what is preventive genomics, right? So preventive genomics essentially means that you're looking at genetic information to identify individuals who are at either risk for certain diseases, but also to understand information of how you're going to use information that comes from your nutrition, from your brain health, from your behaviors and others to be able to alter your lifestyle. And it also gives you information about how a drug interacts with individuals. So that's what we would call as the pharmacogenomics. So I'll give a little flavor of each of those as we go along. So then we move to clinical genomics. So where we see clinical genomics, I think as I discussed earlier, the important part is cancer treatment, because clearly that's a point when people start to understand that they need to have a drug that works for them. And as I mentioned earlier, 75% of the time that drug doesn't work for an individual if you just take something off the shelf. So we're finding that cancer is finding extraordinary amount of value in being able to do genetic testing and being able to understand what will work for them or not. Newborns, to be able to understand how do we look at it from before they are born to when they are born to also when they become adults. And then, of course, we see a lot of rare diseases where individuals who are born with a monogenic condition, but something that is rare, is also something that we're seeing a lot of use of clinical genomics. And worldwide, I think we find that on the treatment side, I think a large number of genetic insurance companies actually cover this, but it depends on which part of the world we are and what they are using that information for. And typically, if it is for treatment, it is much easier to be able to get that coverage. So I hope you can see some of these. There, I have basically taken four things that talk about DNA and what insurance companies have done. And I think the first one was where HSBC Insurance used DNA testing in Hong Kong to be able to use that to give health insights. And here, I think it was used more as positive things that you can reinforce to be able to get consumers to actually start using that information to start exercising and motivating them to eat better. The second is also a collaboration between discovery and human longevity, where you're able to shape your health with genetics. So using that information to be able to change them for a better lifestyle. The third thing that I've put over here is where we are looking at where the Indian IRDAI said you cannot make exclusions related to genetic disorders. So if you do have a disorder, you still can't discriminate based on that. And then the last one that I've picked is one where a recent one in New Zealand, where I think only about a day before, where the geneticists asked for a ban on insurers using genetic tests because they felt that they were still being discriminated regardless of what information is there, because sometimes the doctors might be able to give that information to them. So then the question really remains is that is the information between the insured and the insurer balanced, right? Because ultimately, I think sometimes the insurance, and I'm sure most of you would have this question, is that this is dependent on whether there is an imbalance between the two. And if there is an imbalance, then does it work for both sides? Is it something that works one way or the other? So when we think about the asymmetry between the insured and the insurer, we find that initially the reason that insurance works typically is because insurance companies typically have more information than their customers, whether it is in terms of understanding it from an underwriting perspective to have advantage so that they can set premiums and be able to create policies so they can ultimately be a sustainable business. But today, I think because consumers have access to information that comes from companies like ours, they have more information than insurers. And because insurance companies will not be able to distinguish between a genetic condition or not, the chances of a consumer being able to take a policy that sort of manages their health better is more likely than not. So that is another thing that today I think consumers have much more information than insurers. But the question I think that we all should ask is that are all genetic tests asymmetric? So is there a win-win between insurance and consumers? And I think there are a few areas, right? So I think the first area that I feel that there is a win-win is when you look at adverse effects of medicine. Now here, if you're looking at it, if that is being reimbursed, then creating a low-cost profile from a pharmacogenomics perspective can create a win-win for both the insurer and the consumer, because ultimately you are reducing the adverse effects. You are also being able to create a sticky customer, and you're able to benefit both from reducing the cost of the medications that are being given to the customer. The second part is, will research help make better underwriting decisions, right? So even if, like, think about it, that maybe you can't have individual information about consumers, that, you know, maybe Anu has a higher risk for type 2 diabetes or something like that. But I think if we understand that in this population in Telangana, there are 60% of the people who are likely to be at risk for something, the chances of creating policies based on that are going to be better than if you don't do that. And I think the last part is that if we assume that there is no discrimination towards premiums, and I think in a large part in India that is true because the premiums are in any way very low, then I think that will allow insurance companies to tailor products towards a much more better mutual benefit for each other. Now, when we think about predictive genomics and we think about how this is going to have an effect on an individual, the truth is that genetics is one of the risk factors. It is not the only risk factor. So it's not like a deterministic view on what you're going to get out of this. So basically, when you look at complex conditions, whether it is cardiovascular disease, environment, lifestyle, and others, a large part of it is coming from other things in terms of what you're doing, what you're eating. For instance, in the case of type 2 diabetes, only 27% of the risk is coming from genetics, but the rest of it is coming from what you eat and how you exercise and the environment as well. Similarly, I think 50% of cancers are preventable, 80% of cardiovascular diseases are preventable. But I think people need motivation to be able to do that. And that's why it's important to be able to understand how that genetics can help them understand how this is going to be useful for them. So what do? We create a program, so it creates a profile for a consumer, and the idea is that consumers will be able to change their lifestyle, and in the long run that also helps the insurance company, because that ultimately helps them to reduce cost and ultimately improve customer experience and create a sticky customer. So we don't just do preventive, we are also looking at a lot of the clinical part of genomics, where you're actually using it for things like cancer treatment, for drug responses, for pregnancy, for children. And we also happen to do ancestry. And very recently, I think, also launched a product in the skin and hair condition as well. So these are the kind of things we do. I think on the preventive genomic side, we have products that are specifically tailored towards a condition like oncology, fitness, or genome patri, which basically is a comprehensive one. And then Medicamap, which is more focused around how you react with drugs. And then there's Beauty Map that is focused on skin and hair. So what are we trying to do with this, right? And so I thought give a sense of what Genome Patri does. And so essentially, we are looking at genomics, we are looking at lifestyle, and we're looking at other biomarkers. Clearly, we introduced this concept about 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, I think people did not know what genomics was. So we basically used Genome Patri because we said at least people understand what a Janam Patri is, and therefore we'll be able to actually play on, let people understand what this means based on this term. So what do we do in Genome Patri and other such preventive genomics tests? I think essentially one is that people place an order, they get a little kit in the mail, and you can see that on the screen. They take a little swab sample. I think thanks to COVID, everybody's used to swabbing, but here you just need to swab your cheeks. Then you analyze it for genetic predispositions. You get a report which is almost 100 pages long. And then there is genetic counseling, where you sort of explain to the consumer, take their family history and lifestyle and all of that. And then we do give a personalized action plan. What we've been able to do now, and we have not yet fully released, is that we also want to get information that's coming from their wearables, that's coming from their blood test, all of that simultaneously, and use machine learning to come up with an overall health score for that person that includes your genetic risks as well. So this is sort of how the report looks like. You can see that in some cases there will be red marks, and in the other cases there isn't anything. It doesn't mean that you will never get the disease. It means that you have a lower chance of getting it. So we explained that this is a certain type of a risk based on the population, and we make sure that we also explain what the population risk is, so that if we say that you have 1 in 20 chance, then the chances of somebody having 2 times risk is a high risk. But if the population risk is like in this case the lupus, which is 125 in 10,000 or 100,000, then even if you have 1x, then that is still relatively, it is, the chances of you getting are lower. So I think that's what we are helping people understand, that one is that there is a baseline risk that is there in the population, and this helps you understand if you have an elevated risk based on that or not. And then, of course, there's a lot of scores in terms of in which part of your genetic marker is what kind of genotype you have, because we are coming up with the polygenic risk score where we are assigning risk and weightage based on a specific based on our patented algorithm called SNAPPY, and we are able to come up with a variant score. We also look at things like your heterozygosity and homozygosity, and then an odds ratio to be able to come up with the prevalence, but also what your risk score is. So just to give a sense of what this can do for individuals, one is that there was a person who did this test in 10 years ago, about back in 2013, was in early just 40, had normal, everything looked great, normal vitamin D, vitamin B12, no gastric issues, but the genome test indicated ulcerative colitis, a risk for that, high triglycerides, low vitamin D and B12, risk for some of the statins, and a high risk for lactose intolerance. So we saw that over a period of time, started seeing issues with hypothyroidism, some ulcers in stomach, and a lactose intolerance was diagnosed. A particular statin was given, but based on the profile, that was also not working. There were supplementations that were given. And in 2021, we saw that in spite of good exercise, there was some part of it which was very high triglycerides and low vitamin D and B12 and D, and ultimately had to use intermittent fasting to be able to get the triglycerides in control. But it was possible, and it was possible without any medication. And I think that needed to be able to understand, because there was already a built-in change in terms of how you want to exercise and how you want to look at that. But clearly genetics also plays a role in what you see as overall expression. The second thing I want to explain a little bit about is how do you find out whether a particular medicine works for a person or not. So when you understand that whatever drug that you take in, there is obviously the metabolism of what drug that you take in. You can see whether you tolerate that drug or not, what kind of rate of clearance you have, and adverse reaction. So ultimately, I think, what do you do when you see that report? It shows in red, orange, and white. And when there is something needs to be changed based on the guidelines, either the dosage will be changed so that it becomes more effective for them, or a medication needs to be changed so that you can get personalized treatment for that person. So you basically see that there are pretty much all the specialties that you want to look at, whether it's cardiology, diabetology, psychiatry has become very important, because it takes a long time to be able to see the effects of some of the mental health drugs that you take. So things like antidepressants and others are very common drugs that people take, but they take a long time for it to show effect. Similarly, I think when you look at infectious diseases, hematology, toxicology, and others, there are ways that you'll be able to understand how, for that particular person, which drug is likely to work. So it is not about saying that you are at risk or not, but it is more about saying, will this drug work for this patient or not? So this was one case study where there was a 30-year-old male. Diagnosis was HIV. Doctor wants to prescribe abacavir, but FDA recommended a genetic test because it was part of the protocol. Doctor advised pharmacogenomics test. We found that he had hypersensitivity to abacavir, so an alternate medication was recommended. Similarly, I think we have seen that happen with a lot of drugs, both commonly used drugs in clopidogrel, and also we find that a lot of the cancer drugs as well as others. So this is something that we are seeing, that for this particular patient, you can see that most of the other drugs will work fine. But if you look at it here, the atorvastatin is likely to, you will have to see more details about what needs to change, and the simvastatin. The rest of, at least what is available on this page, everything looks okay. So if the doctor did prescribe one of these drugs, it would work fine on them. So in terms of just the process, I think the consumer places an order online. There is a buccal swab they get. The sample is shipped back, do the genotyping or the sequencing. The report is released. genetic counseling is scheduled, the actionable plan is done, then you do regular screening, you have periodic evaluations and interventions, and that results in a healthy customer. So those were mostly what you look at it from a healthy or a supposedly healthy individual, where you don't have a specifically have a problem, but you're trying to understand and live a more healthier life. You're trying to be proactive about your health. The second part, which is more commonly seen, is clinical genomics, where you're looking at specific problems, or you're looking at, can I look at things like carrier screening to be able, because I'm planning a child, how do you make sure that the child doesn't have any genetic disorders, especially if it's something that is running in the family, or you're looking at how do you actually manage something like your oncology, like a cancer or a neurological problem and things like that. So that is what we would say would be more clinical genomics, and it would be where a doctor would typically prescribe a test, and then you'd be able to actually run that test for them and be able to give them information about either a specific diagnosis in terms of a mutation, or you can look at it from what kind of treatment options are likely to work for them. So that is a little bit. I won't go into detail unless there's something that is any of you want more detail on. But I think just to emphasize that there is the power of early BRCA testing. I think in the US, we found that at the moment BRCA testing became something that the insurance company was reimbursing, we found that there was a huge decline in the number of breast cancer cases. And not because the people were not born with the genetic test, but it's because when you detect it early, you are able to actually reduce mortality, you can improve the quality of life. I think today most doctors will tell you that they still come, I think patients still discover cancers only at stage 3 or stage 4, by which time it becomes much more difficult to be able to reverse back that effect. So when you look at a lot of the regulations, I think there are many different regulations, whether it's Council of Europe, whether it's the Canadian non-discrimination, the England CMO report, the state of New York, and the Indian IRDAI. Ultimately, I think there is a need to be able to not discriminate based on genetic disorders, but there are also certain restrictions. When you look at what the US has with the GINA Act and others, I think essentially what you want to do is to protect consumers, but you also want to make sure that some of the things can be treated early so that you are actually reducing costs down the line. So these are just some examples that I have that, motivation to testing. I think some of them want to look at it for primary prevention, that is to say that can I reduce disease incidence? Can I look at it for early detection, or can I look at it for personalized treatment, or can I look at it for an improved quality of life, like a psychosocial or palliative care and so on? So there are many different aspects of what you can do for using a genomic test, because it's not just about looking at disease risk, but it is also about being able to for early detection and personalized treatment and so on. Now, a lot of people said that, and this is a little bit dated, we are ourselves doing a study on this, is to be able to understand whether people actually made any changes based on the direct-to-consumer products. And we found that pretty much 50% of them actually made changes, and most of those were changes in their diet, in their exercise habits, and supplements. And you have to remember that this is done in the US, where there is no genetic counseling. So in our case, when someone like MapMyGenome does it, when you're looking at it from a counseling perspective, this number is way higher than what you see over here. Of course, there are challenges that are used in genetic testing for insurance. There's the social stigma, there is a right to privacy, there are people with risk for Alzheimer's or other conditions that may be denied insurance. There is non-discrimination based on genomic data, and we can think about discrimination that could either be that someone is not getting the insurance at all, or can adjust the premiums and so on. So these are some of the challenges that we have seen globally in terms of how this might be a challenge. But as I mentioned earlier, I think there are many different advantages of using genetics, because it helps in creating a better monitoring health management plan with risk management. You are also being able to minimize the occurrence and burden of disease in society, and ultimately overall reduce the cost of insurance and improve the quality of life. So ultimately, I think when in sync, I think you reduce cost of treatment, lower morbidity and mortality, and therefore there is a shorter diagnostic odyssey that's ultimately is a benefit to both the insurer as well as the consumer. Of course, there are many different risk factors, like I mentioned, and genetics is one of them. And it is also a way to be able to use this in a scientific, clinical, and actuarial standards, especially if you can use it for understanding, because currently already I think a lot of blood tests can be done for in certain parts of insurance, but there is a discrimination between smoker and a non-smoker. But ultimately, I think you take some of this other information to be able to help guide the consumer. I think that becomes a lot more effective than saying, this is not a good thing, because once consumers know, I think they're more likely to be able to be much more in sync than others. So I think the future of insurance lies in genome mapping, and predictive genomics is the key to unlocking it, because that's what will help and get people before we get to that point. So with that, any questions? So I'll answer one of the questions. I think, see, how frequently is the genome patri done? It's done only once, because it is essentially you're looking at SNPs. So you're looking at markers that have been passed to you from your parents. And therefore, that doesn't change. But there are other changes in your genome that you might look at when you're looking at cancer and others. But that would be what you do in the clinical genomics part. But the genome patri you need to do only once.
Thanks, Anu. Anu, super exciting and super insightful. I think, we're all getting up in the insurance world for learning the genomics side of things. So thank you for again giving us and the community here a little bit of primer again, right? To try to understand that, look, how can we work together with the genomics sector, the industry on the clinical tech side. Anu, let me take a step back. Within India, let's start with India for a minute, right? One of the bigger questions is, we've got obviously IRDA specified and said, hey, no discrimination, right, from their side. But sadly, we've got members of the insurance community here, the Insurtech community here. How would you like to work as MapMyGenome with the insurance community, keeping in mind that one constraint? Or what's kind of an ideal partnership? What may that look like?
So I think there are two things, right? One is that can you do, and I mentioned that you can do like a study on the population. So understanding it from a research point of view. That is not discrimination. You're basically doing it on a research vibe. The second part is to say that maybe you don't discriminate them, but even otherwise, I think, let's say if an insurance company is actually helping them get access to a genetic test, maybe they don't even get access. And that's how we have currently made some of our partnerships where you're saying that the consumer gets back the result, right? They need not share it with the insurance company. But the mere fact that they get access to the results implies that they're likely to change behavior, which is what I wanted to show, that it is when you get it in black and white saying it's in your genetic makeup, the chances that you will change your behavior and your lifestyle are way higher than if you did not have that, right? So I think that would be another thing, that you need not discriminate based on insurance, like the pricing or anything else. But I think if you want to reduce your overall burden of insurance or the cost of this thing, because now the costs have come down quite dramatically.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think if you are able to build something that allows everybody to be in a win-win situation, I think it will be good. Because otherwise, right now, I think it is that a consumer can do it, but you'll only get those consumers who understand that they have a risk for cancer and therefore take a cancer plan, right?
Yeah.
But if it is otherwise, if you're saying that I'm going to give you a policy anyway, and then you are the one who's responsible. Like, I think currently a lot of insurance companies are already motivating people to do it based on steps and all of that.
Yeah.
Maybe this becomes a much more stronger motivation to do that.
Absolutely makes sense. And I know in terms of progression, so for example, if insurers tie up with MapMyGenome, and this is after the policy has been issued and offered the test up. So it was interesting you showed that case study where you saw the progression of that 40-year-old as they move to 50. What's happening after the test is given? How far evolved is MapMyGenome, genetics kind of as an industry to help crack then the patient or the policyholder or the consumer for the rest of the life against some of these
So
diagnoses. Yeah.
yeah, so I think this was more shown that sometimes there's things in your genetics that you might, if you did not do the exercise and all, you would probably be in a worse condition today. Right? Today he's able to manage it, but primarily because one, he had access to the information. And so lactose intolerance, for instance, was one of the things that was there. Clearly, he had grown up drinking coffee and drinking things, and even though he didn't eat a lot of lactose, I think eventually it started to show,
Got
right?
it.
And so one of the things the doctor said was that actually 60% of Indians are probably at risk for lactose, but we continue to do that and then complain about about problem. So one is that, of course, that you can, when you have that information, you're likely to take action right in front. The second part is that when I look at a lot of the lifestyle changes, there are many things you can do beyond that as well, right? So if you look at all the 12 hallmarks of aging that are there today, that has been released in 2022, you'll find that actually, this genetic testing which you're doing in genome patri is a baseline that is not changing. But there are many things that are, right? Your
Yes.
microbiome is changing, your epigenetics is changing, a lot of other things are changing. Of course, those are still much more expensive than what you can do today, a SNP based test. So there are ways that we are able to help consumers towards their journey on better health, whether it is customized vitamins, whether it is doing additional tests, whether we also started doing some blood tests for individuals so that we can motivate them further to do that. And ultimately want to make it in an app that allows them and gives them notifications to constantly change their behavior.
Makes sense. I'm going to pick up a couple of questions. This is a question from Arun Jain. What are the top 3 use cases where genomics is used in insurance across the developing worlds? And maybe I know you could pick up a couple of very specific examples of other markets that you've seen, so it'll help the community here understand that.
So I think the two, three most common ones are cancer treatment.
Okay.
That we've seen a lot, and I think there is uh, pretty much every cancer is slightly different, right? So you want to understand what are the mutations, and then you also to which kind of drugs will work for them, but also to see what kind of like tumor mutation burden and a lot of other things that you can do with that. So one is, of course, in cancer. The second is in mother and child, right? You're planning a baby. I think a lot of countries have made the early, the first 5 tests to be able to detect. An example of that would be in the UK. They're now making gentamicin because as a checking for that, for a genetic change, because I think there were side effects of that. So, and then there are things like, when you're born, you have things like the G6PD, thalassemia, and all of these, which today I think the Indian government is also doing with the Nidan Kendras and others, but I think it's still not yet as prevalent as we would like it to be. So I think that newborn screening, getting it done as soon as a baby is born, that would be another very important use case. And the third use case is to use it where you want to encourage people to live healthier. Right. So, like I gave the 2 examples of Discovery and HSBC, and there are a few more as well.
Got it. Anu, we've got a question from Professor Pandey from BIMTech. And his question is, what is the extent of use of genome testing in life medical underwriting in other countries where it is allowed or permitted? Do you have any specific examples to share with us?
Yeah. So I think what I found was that, like, commonly used, I think there's a reimbursement, right? So most of the US genomics industry runs on reimbursement. And so pretty much most of your clinical tests are all reimbursed,
Okay.
and reimbursed at really, really high costs, right? Like, so if you think about it, I've been in the industry now for a long time. Some of the tests were as high as $15,000, $20,000, and then $3,000. I think when Myriad was there, and I think now the rates have come down slightly, but it's still there. And these are fairly common reimbursements that you see across the US. The only thing is that they can't really distinguish between one person and the other, but I think they're using it for better treatment or outcomes and so on. So that we are seeing. We are also seeing that some of these, so the clinical part is very common. The ones that I mentioned, the South African one was more consumer based, sort of like a whole genome sequencing. And the HSBC was with circle DNA to be able to understand that. So I think these are some. set of examples that we have seen, but there are many. I think in the US at least, I know that all of the newborn screening is done, all reimbursed. And so there were like many companies that came out because I think, clearly, I think people continue to have babies, so that's an area that is constantly growing. And then there is the whole cancer treatment that we're seeing, but we're also seeing like a lot of use case of genetic testing in mental health, which also now will be an important use case as well.
Got it. And I know how closely tied are now this idea of personalized medicines along with your test, right? And what's coming out of your test. So you mentioned, for example, vitamins, right, that are built for a specific individual and made for them. How closely is kind of the drug side and what's coming out of your genome? For a second, how closely intertwined are the two areas now, and what are we finding?
So I think one is that when you look at vitamins and you look at all of that, there'll be certain mutations that will sometimes you might not metabolize as well, right? So you might need some supplements. So one is that can you get it from the normal food sources? You'll probably change some of your food sources. And in some cases, you might have to take specific types of supplements to be able to manage that. So it is, and it's possible, right? So each of those we understand that is now becoming a very popular field of functional genomics that we are seeing a lot of experts coming in that as well. The second part is when I was explaining the Medica map, which is more a low cost pharmacogenomics profile. So earlier, I think they would just look at one drug and they would say that this the cost of doing this would be quite significant, right? It becomes difficult for an insurance company to actually do that for as a screening mechanism.
Yeah.
But nobody goes to an emergency room planning to go to an emergency room, right? Most of the time. So one of the things is that if everybody had a profile done at birth or whenever, then the chances of them having the profile, so that whenever there is a use case of when you go to a hospital, you have the whole profile with you, and that way you don't have to worry about am I giving the wrong medicine or not, right? So that can be a big use case, and that's why we said, doing and pharmacogenomics now, I think even in the US has become very popular. But I think the cost wise, I think it's still higher than what we have been able to do right now, which is in the 7,000 retail, 6,000 7,000 rupees as retail. So I think that allows us to be able to at least find ways to work with insurance companies, because I remember the initial discussions was more that if your test cost is 15,000, how are we going to even think about doing that given the current insurance premiums?
Yeah, yeah. And it may be interesting, I know, because premium financing is coming in. It may be interesting to see if we can actually do now a genetics test financing as a part of the health insurance
Exactly.
premium,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
that's a possibility. We could spread that over 5 years. And maybe the regulator could, as long as they're allowing it again, say, hey, it'll be split over the next 5 years of your policy, right? So technology lets us do that and collect that payments over 5 years now and cut that cost down now to,
Exactly.
not a one time, but a EMI, right? That could possibly be built in. So some of that innovation is coming in the insurance sector. The regulators allowing for a lot of innovation like that too. So we can see more expensive treatments, including tests like the one that you have, the genome patri test, that might be the cost of it may be split or spread over an extended period of time. I've got a couple of more clinical oriented questions here, but I am going to ask them. I won't say that I necessarily understand them, but these are for you, Anu. First is, what is the duration for gene therapy or gene remodeling for any individual to get noticed? This is a question from Mr. S.K. Bharadwaj.
Uh, for gene therapy or gene remodeling for any individual to get noticed. I'm not sure if I fully understood the question,
Okay.
but basically, I think when you're looking at gene therapy, it could be based on like you are either doing it for a specific condition, right? So you have a genetic thing. I think there's one gene therapy, for instance, approved for a eye problem. Those are like a normal medication would work, and that works only on that specific individuals.
Okay.
Now, there are new talks about the CRISPR based technologies. Currently, I think we're seeing a lot of new research happening in that space. What is legally not allowed is to be able to do that in embryos, but you are finding that the FDA is actually approving a lot of gene therapy drugs that are there for specific conditions, and those only affect that particular case in that particular organ or that particular disease, and they are limiting it to that particular generation. So I think I'm not sure if that's, and each one is different, so I can't generalize that in terms of how each of these would work. But that would be based on that specific uh, disease and that specific therapy that we're seeing.
Got it. We've got a question here from Mr. Dilip Raj, which is again, how is drug delivery linked to pricing and risk evaluation? And do monoclonal antibodies have an impact on pricing of risk? Does that make sense? Sorry, again, I'm punting this to you as a question. I have less understanding of this as an area.
So, drug delivery is linked to pricing and risk evaluation. I'm assuming, I mean, I'm not the expert in pricing
Yeah.
or on this thing, but monoclonal antibodies and all these are obviously classes of drugs. Some of them will work or not work. So, I think from a genetics point of view, I think because some of them are quite expensive, I think that's why first we started seeing that the value of genetics in cancer, because the costs were high, the efficacy was low. So you're looking at like 70% not being effective. You're looking at sometimes the therapies that were, you know, running into crores of rupees, and in some rare conditions, I think even like millions of dollars, right? So I think that is when we started to see that the value, the cost value of between the this thing started to move towards genetics, because you started seeing there's more value, there is less cost in testing versus what you see as a therapy. But today I think, and I tell this to a lot of people, that it's not just about the cost, right? Like
Yeah.
for most of us, I think we can afford a lot of medications, and today you can get it off on the like off the counter. But the problem is also it can cause problems in our liver and a lot of other things. And I think when I was chatting with one of the nutritionists, said 40% of Indians now have fatty liver disease and things like that, right? So I think in by subjecting ourselves to things that are not of value to us, I think we are doing more harm.
Yeah.
That it's not just about cost; it's also about what damage you're doing to your body. So I think those are two things. Specifically on whether how it has on pricing, unfortunately, I'm not the right
Sure.
person to
Yeah.
respond.
And I can answer a couple of things around that, right? Actually, I know, globally, I think the idea of a formulary exists with insurers. So, especially in India, if you go to other countries where there's a big difference in pricing between branded medication and, say, even generic medication within branded, also there are multiple types of drugs that are actually available for a particular condition, disease. What's happening is increasingly insurers are playing a role in terms of approving very specific brands, medication, where they have a medical committee that looks at the efficacy of the drugs, including drug delivery is one aspect of it. But a number of factors kind of go into play before they approve specific medications. So, especially in the US, I think the news is coming out that doctors are kind of, sick and tired of the insurers intervening and saying, hey, in this particular care pathway, this is what I'm going to allow. And this specific brand of medication with these salts, this kind of drug delivery, et cetera, they are getting into it and jumping right in. But having said that, that's an increasing trend globally, right? So again, you started off, Anu, by saying, hey, the insurers are incentivized to make sure that their policyholders get the best possible treatment. I'd like to believe that most insurers will go down that track and would like to act on behalf of the millions of policyholders and try to make sure that they get the best treatment at the best, at the right point of time, right? That's really how insurance should work going forward as an industry, basically. We're almost at time. I think most of the questions here are done. Anu, I wanted to thank you for your time. Anu Ghosh, who's an executive committee member of IA. Anu Ghosh, thank you for setting this up. Really appreciate it. Anu, we look forward to your continued kind of engagement with the Insurtech community in India. We are looking to bring more and more clinical tech into our industry here in India, and also support Indian Insurtech startups that would like to collaborate with companies such as yours, and possibly also take this technology globally, right? Combined with insurances in the area. So any ideas that you have for us, please do share with us. We look forward to having you come every now and then and tell us more about how the industry is kind of progressing and how we can work with you from our side. So thank you. Really, really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for the audience, and please reach out to us if you have any thoughts or comments. Then we can also follow up with Anu Acharya from this. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you, Prerit. Thank you, Anu, and thank you, Shubha.
yeah. Thank you.